He didn't expect danger to come from his own neighborhood. Just an ordinary day, ordinary streets. Yet in a matter of seconds, everything familiar became a trap. Voices shouted, doors slammed, and judgment weighed heavier than fear itself. He tried to explain, tried to defend himself, but it was like the world had already decided his guilt. Every glance, every whisper, every step he took was measured against the color of his skin, against the assumptions they carried like weapons. And then it happened, an act so small, so everyday, yet it set off a chain of events he couldn't stop. What seemed like a minor confrontation turned into a nightmare that exposed a reality too many pretend doesn't exist. The neighbors who smiled at him yesterday now looked away, or worse, watched with silent approval. In that moment, he realized this wasn't just about him. It was about every subtle injustice, every whispered insult, every invisible barrier that builds a world of exclusion brick by brick. He had no idea how deep it ran, how personal it would become, or how public it would eventually explode. How far would they go? And how would he survive when the system itself seemed to turn against him? But what he didn't know yet was that the fight he was about to face would reveal truths that could change everything. For him, and for everyone watching, tea was a morning like any other. Jamal had his coffee, slipped on his jacket, and stepped out into the neighborhood he had called home for years. He knew every crack in the sidewalk, every familiar smile from neighbors, every dog that barked as he passed. Life felt predictable, safe, normal, at least that's what he thought. Jamal worked at the local library, a place filled with quiet corners, the smell of old books, and the occasional laugh of children discovering stories for the first time. He loved his routine, the early morning jogs, the late-night study sessions, the simple rhythm of life that gave him comfort. People trusted him. People knew him. Or so he believed. That day, he had a quick stop at the corner cafe before work. The barista waved, a friendly nod, and Jamal smiled back. But as he turned the corner toward the library, a group of men loitering near the street caught his attention. They weren't just idly standing, they were staring. The kind of stare that doesn't just see you, but judges, measures, assumes. Jamal hesitated. He had felt the weight of looks before, but today it was different. He brushed it off, thinking maybe it was nothing, but the pit in his stomach told a different story. He continued walking, quicker now, feeling the usual rhythm of the neighborhood shift under his feet. Something was off. Small things, a door that used to creak now slammed too loud, a dog that barked at strangers didn't bark at him, suddenly became warnings he couldn't ignore. He didn't know it yet, but this ordinary morning was about to unravel every sense of security he had built. Every familiar face, every neighborly smile, every routine step could no longer be trusted. And it all started with one simple moment, one encounter that would ignite a chain of events he never saw coming. Jamal tried to shake off the uneasy feeling as he entered the library. The familiar scent of books usually comforted him, but today it felt hollow. The usual greetings from colleagues were curt, distracted, as if they barely noticed him. At first, he brushed it off. Maybe they were busy, maybe it was just him, but a small, sharp comment from a patron cut deeper than expected. "I don't think you belong here," the woman said, her voice low, almost casual, yet carrying a weight Jamal could feel in his chest. Shock and disbelief froze him for a moment. He blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly, but the smirk on her face told him he had. Throughout the morning, the subtle slights piled up. Doors that once opened with a smile now clicked shut, whispers followed him down aisles of books, and people's eyes darted away the moment he looked their way. Jamal felt the walls closing in. It wasn't one person, it was the community, the invisible rules, the assumptions that had nothing to do with who he was. And the worst part? Nobody would say it outright, but everyone seemed to confirm it silently. By lunchtime, it escalated. A security guard approached him, questioning why he was in his own library. Jamal's pulse quickened. "I work here," he said, showing his badge, trying to keep his voice steady. The guard's eyes lingered longer than necessary, scanning him as though his very presence was suspicious. Then, a sharp comment, "Make sure you don't wander where you don't belong." Words like knives. Jamal clenched his fists, breathing hard, but knew arguing would only make things worse. Leaving the library, he felt the stares multiply. Across the street, a group of teenagers whispered, pointing, laughing just loud enough to catch his attention. In the cafe, the barista avoided eye contact entirely, pretending not to see him. Every step became a calculation. Should he keep walking, cross to another side, act invisible? The world that had felt safe was suddenly a minefield, and every familiar street corner now carried the threat of confrontation. By mid-afternoon, the tipping point came. A city bus pulled up as Jamal waited at the stop. The driver, noticing him, shook his head with a look of clear disdain. "You shouldn't be here," the driver muttered under his breath, loud enough for others on the bus to hear. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, some looking away, some sneering. Jamal felt rage, humiliation, and fear swirl together. He realized, with a sinking weight, that no one would protect him. The system, the neighborhood, even the everyday routines he once trusted, they all worked against him in subtle, poisonous ways. That evening, Jamal returned home, heart racing, palms sweating, mind replaying the day in endless loops. Each event, each slight, seemed to build toward something larger, something unavoidable. The silence in his apartment felt heavy, oppressive, as if the walls themselves were holding back the storm outside. And then he noticed it. An envelope slid under his door. No return address, just his name in sharp, unfamiliar handwriting. Inside, a single sentence scrawled in red ink: "You don't belong here. Leave before it's too late." Fear gripped him, a cold, unrelenting wave. This wasn't just prejudice anymore, it was a warning, a deliberate act meant to intimidate him. And as he stared at the words, Jamal understood that this was just the beginning. Every glance, every whisper, every step would now carry consequences far beyond embarrassment. The invisible barriers had turned into visible threats, and the world he had known had fractured in an instant. But what would he do next? How could he navigate a world that seemed set against him at every turn? The answer was coming, and it would push him to the edge in ways he never imagined. Jamal's hands trembled as he stepped onto the street that had once felt like home. The sun had dipped low, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward him like fingers. Around him, neighbors he had greeted for years now whispered behind curtains, their eyes sharp and judging. Every step toward the corner cafe felt heavier than the last. His chest tightened, breaths shallow, as the envelope's words burned in his mind: "You don't belong here. Leave before it's too late." And then it happened. A man he had passed countless times before stepped out from an alleyway, blocking his path. "You've been warned," he said, voice low but dripping with menace. Before Jamal could respond, a group of others appeared, surrounding him, their stares cold and unyielding. The fear hit like a tidal wave. Every instinct screamed to run, to disappear, but the weight of years of quiet endurance rooted him in place. Shouts rang out from the other side of the street. A passerby tried to intervene, but hesitation froze them. Jamal's world shrank to the immediate, the mocking faces, the sneers, the invisible rules they enforced with lethal precision. He realized then that this wasn't random, this was orchestrated. The very neighborhood, the system that claimed to protect, had turned against him. Every street he had walked safely for years now felt like a gauntlet. But in that moment of suffocating despair, something shifted. He remembered the library, the students who relied on him, the stories of courage he had loved since childhood. Anger ignited, sharp and raw. This was no longer about fear, it was about standing, about refusing to vanish. With a steadying breath, Jamal held his ground. His voice rang out, strong and unwavering: "I belong here. I always have. And I'm not leaving." The men faltered, unsure, their confidence shaken by his sudden defiance. The whispers behind windows grew louder, and the tension thickened like the air before a storm. For a brief, tense heartbeat, the street seemed to hold its breath. And in that suspended silence, Jamal realized the fight wasn't just about this moment. It was about every small act of prejudice, every wall built by assumptions, every invisible hand trying to push him out. Jamal made it home that evening, heart still pounding, skin tingling from the adrenaline and fear. The streets were quiet now, but the echoes of the day lingered in his mind. The mocking faces, the whispers, the suffocating weight of assumptions that had tried to erase him. He locked the door behind him, leaned against it, and for the first time, allowed himself to breathe. Relief washed over him, but it was bittersweet. Nothing could undo the humiliation, the sense of vulnerability, the realization that prejudice could appear anywhere, even in places that once felt safe. Yet, amid the fear, there was clarity. Jamal understood something fundamental. This wasn't just about him. It was about the countless moments, subtle and overt, where society judges someone not by who they are, but by the color of their skin, the way they look, or the assumptions others carry. It was about the invisible barriers that strip people of dignity, the silent complicity of those who look away, and the courage it takes to stand even when the world seems stacked against you. That night, Jamal reflected on the day's events and what they revealed. He realized his fear had transformed into resolve. He couldn't change every person or erase prejudice overnight, but he could refuse to be silenced. He could speak, act, and bear witness, not just for himself, but for everyone who has faced similar injustices. Every step forward, every voice raised against discrimination, became part of a movement stronger than intimidation. And as he gazed out his window at the streets that had once confined him, he knew the truth. Justice is not always immediate, but courage leaves a mark that cannot be erased. The question lingered in the quiet air, heavy and necessary. How many more will face this before the world finally opens its eyes? It was a hard day, a painful lesson, but also a call to action. To see, to speak, and to stand. Because silence only allows injustice to live another day.